and welcome to the PowerScore LSAT podcast. I'm Dave Kaloran in Napa Valley.
And this is John Dinning, still in Los Angeles.
Yeah, I don't think we've moved at all now in 3+ months.
I feel like a butterfly. I'm slowly emerging from this quarantine chrysalis, but slowly is definitely the operative word.
It is a chrysalis. That's actually a good reference because I feel like the LSAT's going through kind of a chrysalis phase right now too.
Yeah, are they going to come out a beautiful butterfly at the end, or are we looking more like a moth?
I hope a beautiful butterfly emerges. That would be outstanding.
This is the year of the 17-year cicada, I guess it depends on where you're from, emergence. So look out, North Carolina. That's what this feels like a little bit to me.
You've seen the jokes where it's like the cicadas are in the ground. They're like, 2020? Maybe I won't come out.
Maybe wait. 18 years doesn't seem so bad.
This year's not so great. Well, speaking of, the chrysalis form and change, we just had the June LSAT-Flex tests go off, the first 2 primary days of it, Sunday and Monday. So let's talk about that today. And the first thing I think is, let's talk about what you're drinking today.
Yeah, the first and most important, given the last 48 hours or so that you and I have been through.
They're rough.
It's been a pummeling. So we talked a little bit. You made a comment as we were looking early at the first day, and you're like, well, and they're off. As scores and information started to come back out, or results, people were talking. And I think you and I both immediately flashed to the fact that we're deep into this race now. We're rounding the second turn. We're into the laps. And with that in mind, the most famous race, at least in America probably, is the Kentucky Derby. At least that was the first that came to my mind. So I wanted to make a mint julep. I know you're a fan of this drink. It's a good old Southern drink. Unfortunately, I didn't have any of the ingredients. Yeah, I didn't have any of the ingredients except for Kentucky bourbon. Kentucky bourbon. So I am drinking simply a Basil Hayden's on the rocks. A strong drink, a delicious drink, and I think I've earned it.
So you tried for a mint julep, failed miserably, and this is what you've ended up with.
Yeah, there's only 3 ingredients, and I was 1 for 3, so not great.
It really is. The races are, underway. We had the May Flex. Now we've got June. We know July's coming up. You and I have talked about August and how we think August is very likely to flex as well. So I love that idea of off to the races. I have chosen a running drink as well. It is a rum runner, which is loaded with alcohol and fruit. So, of course, right up my alley.
It's perfect for you.
Yeah, this is the kind of thing that I have, in fact, ordered in the past, independently of this podcast.
And independently of me, I hope, because I think I would have given you some grief.
If I see a rum runner, or if I'm in the mood for it, I'll certainly order it. But you go to places sometimes, and they're like, our specialty is rum runner. And I'm like, excellent, I'm in the right place for me.
Fair enough. And I'll give you this much credit. It is rare the day that I can peer pressure you into anything.
No,
especially out of a
pressure.
Drink. So,
music, I listen to what I want to. And I was thinking about this last night after the first day and saying I really would like to get some of the music that I truly love on this podcast. Some of the girl bands from England, some of the K-pop stuff that I like to listen to. And I can imagine that your thought of that is absolutely not.
What is K-pop and why? That's my thought. Shame on you.
I love the fact that you don't even know what it is.
Well, if it were up to me to pick the music, it'd just be like audiobooks, and no one wants that. So
true.
I'll defer to you in this stuff.
K-pop is traditionally thought of as Korean pop, which is very girl band oriented, but also BTS is K-pop as well, except they've certainly gone past that. There's also J-pop too.
Is that Japanese?
From Japan. Mm-hmm. It's all very upbeat.
I'm learning.
Yeah, I enjoy it, but my daughter loves it even more.
That's cute.
So, but turning to the music.
Yeah, I was going to say, speaking of music, you picked today's.
I did, and I didn't choose any girl bands that I love, which is unfortunate, but that's coming. So I'm just warning everybody who's listening. I have chosen an English band that I think is extremely cool. They're up and coming. I was slated to see them in May. In Sacramento, actually. And then, of course, everything got canceled, and I was pretty bummed out about it. But the band is called Sports Team, which I think is a hilarious name, because clearly they're not probably sports fans all that much if you're going to call yourself that. And the song is a very cool song called The Races. Yeah. So if you have never heard of them, check it out. They just released a new album, a week and a half ago. It's a cool tune.
Again, yeah, nicely thematic for what we're kind of focusing on today, which is the fact that we're off to the races. Sports team as a name is fantastic. I agree. Reminds me of Belushi's T-shirt in Animal House that just says college.
College. I know exactly what you're talking about.
That and I miss sports. There's an event that goes on this week that you and I were long-term attendees of, which is the Heritage Golf Tournament.
Yes.
I don't know if you knew that. Golf is kind of back. They're running that this weekend. So if you're getting a sports jonesing out there, that might be something of a fix if you're a golf fan.
I think you are aware of the fact that the Heritage is my favorite golf tournament, primarily because of the environment around it.
For sure.
It's a huge
I've spent
party.
4 days there and not seen a single swing. But
yeah. I usually saw
nothing.
a few, but it's such a great time. And I've said this many times. I enjoy the Heritage far more than I enjoyed going to the Masters, which to me is just really staid. And I don't like the course, which I know is a heretical statement.
Yeah, but I'm just going to let that one go. My anger will eclipse the rest of this discussion if I'm not careful.
Well, we'll end it on the sports team note. If you get a chance to see them, I hear the shows are absolutely raucous, and I'm hoping to see them when they come back to the U.S. later on this fall.
And we'll put a link to that song so you guys can preview them if you've never heard.
Oh, yeah, there's some great lyrical turns in there, and it's definitely upbeat. Let's move on to the LSAT world.
Yeah.
Get down with it.
Which is the entirety of our world at the moment.
Yes, it really has. And we were going to talk about the June Flex test and discuss exactly what happened, how it played out, what they did with the sections. We'll talk about some scale predictions as well. So that is coming. But let's talk a little bit about some of the strange things that have been going on, leading up to that LSAT-Flex. Do you want to talk about this ProctorU email?
I suppose we both should.
You're the one that called the number and found that the number was problematic. So I think this is your domain.
Fair enough. You were the one who first alerted me to this by sending me some screenshots from different students who had gotten an email from ProctorU, the group that administers the test, saying essentially that certain people had registered for a time slot on the LSAT and been approved for it that actually wasn't available. And in looking through this email, it was dodgy to begin with. It wasn't terribly well written or worded. But what stood out to me most was that in this email, aside from just the general terror factor it incited, there were 2 different phone numbers for ProctorU. In the signature of the email was an 855 number, but in the body of the email, where the instructions to call were, there was a 1-800 number. The other 7 digits were the same. So I said, I wonder what they're doing here. And I called the 800 number. And much to my delight, there's no other way to put it, it actually was not ProctorU. It was, I don't know the name of the exact service, so I'll say just generically, it was a phone sex hotline, chat line. And it began with essentially saying that hot singles were waiting to talk to me. And, if you're a guy looking for hot ladies, press 1. And I stayed on the line just to see what else happened. I should have just pressed 1. But it had an option for the ladies, too. If you're a lady looking to chat with a hot guy, press 2. And that was the point that I hung up.
You started to say that in the right voice. If you're a single lady, that's what you need to have. Stay on the line to talk to hot men in your area.
Fair enough. If I ever get entirely fed up with LSAC, I'll be the guy at the other end of press 2.
Nobody thought they'd be hearing this when they turned this podcast on, I can tell you that.
Nope. If anybody thought there was going to be a phone sex line discussion, shame on you for anticipating this. But yeah, and so I put this on Reddit as like for anyone getting this email, number 1, this is hilarious. Number 2, I wonder if this is actually some sort of very sophisticated spam where it was this phone number, this whatever hotline, trying to advertise. But it turned out the email was in fact real. They had just, whoever sent it, botched it a bit and mistyped the ProctorU number. And ProctorU actually went in and commented on that thread to try to clarify for people as well. So I got an official response on Reddit to my kind of prodding about this. And what had happened ultimately was that ProctorU hadn't set a cutoff time between Sunday and Monday night. And so people registered in that window when, in fact, it was supposed to cut off at 7 p.m. on Sunday. People were registering when there was going to be no proctors available. It got sorted out. People were able to make this work. But that was the first bit of comedy leading into this weekend.
That's interesting because I did think that some people had been scheduled for normal times and they got canceled on as well.
Some people got this email and called ProctorU and they were like, no, it's a mistake. You're fine. Other people got the email and called ProctorU and said, no, you need to reschedule.
And other people called a phone sex line.
And other people had to get out their credit cards. I won't tell you how much I spent, but it was worth it.
This is easily my most favorite turn in a podcast ever.
Yeah.
You could not have imagined that one coming.
No.
Well, that's actually really cool, though, that ProctorU came in and commented on your thread. I love when I see that from companies who are like, yeah, I'll address the issue. And maybe there was a mistake made. Obviously, it wasn't intentional. It wasn't malicious. It was kind of funny.
This is comedy, accidental comedy. And the fact that I was flagging this as a potential spam, I obviously got their attention as well. They're like, no, look, it's real. We just screwed up.
That's great.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody's mad about it. Obviously, people didn't want to have their test times changed, and that was frustrating. But the email itself looks like it was, that number at least was a mistake. So glad that they actually addressed it. Thumbs up to them.
Yeah, agreed. And if you were too mad about it, at least they gave you a point of easy relief.
This might be a running theme for quite a while now.
I know. I think I did 3 straight episodes on who's the guy from New England? Robert Kraft. So.
Robert Kraft, yeah.
Yeah.
He's an interesting character.
Sure.
I also saw LSAC went out and did something that I applauded, which was they opened up their hours on the weekend.
Yeah.
And they were open, I guess, for a couple of hours on Saturday morning. And then on Sunday, they were open all the way up until 9 p.m. And they did that again on Monday. That's a little bit later than normal, but they're normally not open at all on Sunday. And I thought that was an intelligent move because you've got people taking the Flex on Sunday. You need to have phone support. And I know people had to use that too. So that's the kind of thing that if you're going to have a weekend test, you need to be open and available.
Yeah, especially when there's this third party and there's miscommunication and confusion. I'm really glad that they opened themselves up Sunday. And I know for a lot of people, it was a lifesaver. People testing Monday could call in on Sunday and actually get their stuff sorted out. I know a lot of people were able to do that. So huge applause for LSAC doing that.
Yeah, I know some people wanted to withdraw or change things and were worried about the fact that, you know, they had their tests on Monday. I was like, I think they're going to be open on Sunday. And then they did confirm that to me, which I appreciated greatly. And then they were able to call in and take care of it. So
yeah, that was a nice policy change. I hope they stick to it, at least for the foreseeable future. There's also been a tonality change over there. I don't want to call it an attitude so much, but at least the way they present themselves, I think, has really taken a turn for the positive.
We've said this before, that I think this was one of the big side effects of Kelly Testy coming in.
Yeah, I agree.
Was that they have changed their approach to a lot of different things. And I see a strong desire on their part to try to get things right. Whereas in the past, I saw a great deal of indifference. Kind of like, take it or leave it. This is the way that it is. Now it doesn't feel that way anymore. It feels like, look, sometimes we have to do it this way and you do have to accept that. But they're so much more willing to explain and try to provide context. It is definitely a different type of operational setup that they have going now, and certainly a completely different mental approach to this, which is exactly what you need in this kind of environment where everybody can talk.
I know that tweet of theirs caught your eye. The fact that they're actually publicly encouraging is, I mean, it shouldn't be the sort of thing that turns my head, but it did in a good way. They even used our phrase of "you've got this," which I'm happy to see them borrow.
It's a pretty common. I don't know if we can. Oh, you want to take it for ours?
Yeah, that's
okay. We inspire on all levels. That's right. You know, 5 years ago, you wouldn't have seen that.
No.
So quite honestly, to see them communicate that way is fantastic. I would encourage them strongly to continue to communicate more and more frequently and openly about this stuff. There's all sorts of channels. Students definitely want the information. And we certainly try on our side to provide as much information as possible. I was crazy on Twitter all through the weekend with updates and then Sunday and Monday. So join the party, guys.
Yeah. In fact, it's funny you mentioned channels and outlets and stuff for their information to get well distributed. In a lot of cases, through you as a single source, as anyone who followed your Twitter over the weekend and today, Monday, has seen. There was another thing that they, I think, clued you in on as well that has been a common question, and that's about when people are going to be able to create their sign-up time for the July Flex test.
Yeah. And that is coming up. They haven't set an exact date yet, but everybody who is going to take the July test and you want to sign up for your particular time, that is coming up sometime during the week of June 22nd through 26th. So I don't know if it's going to be the 22nd or the 24th or what day exactly. They will send out an email a couple days beforehand, and then there'll be an email that goes out at the moment that it opens that allows you to get in there. So that is coming up another week or so, it looks like, before they do that.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, that's great. And that's about where most of the communication ends in terms of what they've been doing on a broad scale. We still know some stuff, but like you want to do it? Law:fully blog?
The famous Law:fully. Actually, they've come out with a few recently. They've kind of picked that back up. The most recent one I think is a little bit interesting for students who are looking to attend law school this fall, because it does talk about what law schools are doing and some of the choices they're making about in-person classes, hybrid classes, what have you. So check that out. There has been no podcast, though, in 3 months. So someone's having a 3-month vacation over there, and I was thinking to myself, I would like a 3-month vacation.
You used this word twice. What is vacation?
It's a new word. I don't know. Being at home has not caused me to stop working at all.
No, if anything, it's amplified it. But yeah, I haven't seen any podcasts from them. I think we've picked up that baton and run with it, if this is in fact a races episode.
Yeah, if it's a races. So I don't know. There is some numerical information that comes out, and we're able to update that. So let's just flip right into that, because I think that's a perfect transition. Let's talk about the June LSAT-Flex. So this was a small test overall. There really was about 8,000 test takers. They are not done yet. The Sunday and Monday are the 2 main days, and then you have a much smaller number of accommodated test takers and other examinees that come in the 2 days afterwards. So tomorrow and the day after, you'll have a couple hundred students, probably at most, that will be in there.
But, I know some people testing Thursday as well. So
yeah. So the numbers aren't final, but we know it was just over 8,000. And it looks like there was a bit over 3,800 people that took the test on Sunday. It looks like another 4,000 plus took it on Monday. So pretty sizable test dates. And I know from an application standpoint that earlier this year, they were running about 2.5% behind applications. And once May came out, they're only down to like 1.5%, 1.4%. So they're catching back up with the cycle. And one of the goals here was to allow test takers to get the LSAT done so they could apply to law school this year. And it looks like it's working. So I'm sure they're pretty thrilled about that, because that was part of the stated goals of what they wanted to do. Definitely. Give people that opportunity, and it looks like it's working.
Yeah. So that's the numbers. Let's talk about the administration itself, not the content quite yet. We'll get there. But how do you feel it went overall?
Overall, I think it was good.
Yeah.
Here's the way that it splits out. And you and I have talked about this before. If everything's good for you, you get signed up quickly, you don't have any issues, it's an A+ experience. When the Flex works, it's fantastic. If you do have issues, it rapidly feels like it's catastrophic. It may not be. You may still get through the test. And I had a number of students that I talked to who had issues but still were able to complete the test. Mm-hmm. But of course, anytime you have a high stakes exam like this and there are interruptions and problems, people are going to freak out. So you have this complete bifurcation in terms of how people perceive it. The people who have a good experience love it. The people who don't get very angry, and I think to some extent rightfully so. So for me, because of that, I know I'm very familiar with the issues. I know there are fewer issues than there were in May. So I think that's a definite positive. It's got to be like a B+ for me. And I think improving, they're heading towards A. Mm-hmm. And we'll talk about that in a second. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, very similarly. You get this weird, almost inverse bell curve of noise that comes out after this. If it's the best test day ever and people loved it, they're going to hop online or call us or both. If people hated it or something went wrong, we're going to hear from those too. But the people who are like, yeah, I think it went pretty good. It's just like the Flex test I bought from you guys and took it home and now I'm done. You don't hear as much from those people. And that's the vast majority of people in the middle. It's like this almost Yelp polarization for reviews.
Yeah.
The ends get a lot of attention, but the 3 and 4 stars don't. I would say this was a 3.5, 4-star type of exam. If that's a B plus, then yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, I think what happens is you maybe have 1% of problems, but those people are certainly well, situated to really say something about it, and they will. They're upset about what's happened, and they let people know because they're looking to figure out what to do. And that was the majority of messages that I was getting over the 2 days was people who were like, this has happened. What do I do at this point? And unfortunately, for the most part, you are at the mercy of both ProctorU and LSAC during that kind of situation. There's not a whole lot you can do. So, I wish I had some kind of like magic wand that would say, all right, problem solved. Now you're reconnected and everything's up and running and you're going. But it is unfortunate that it doesn't work that way. You have to work through the channels that they give you.
Yeah, ProctorU is the immediate, and then LSAC seems to be the slightly more long-term. It's like the diagnosis and remedy. So if you had a problem during the test, it was really on ProctorU to try to fix it if you wanted to finish right then. If you had a problem and couldn't, or ProctorU couldn't satisfy you, then it becomes LSAC's business to see what you're going to get next. Whether that's a makeup, whether that's a free repeat, whether it's nothing. Which fortunately was not the case for just about everyone I've talked to. LSAC's been, once again, pretty accommodating when people have faced clear issues. But the issues were different. The nature of the complaints seemed to change here from what we saw in May.
I think it's a very interesting point because what we saw in May, especially on the first day, was that there were some horrendously long connection times just to get a proctor. Like you'd show up at your time at 10 a.m. and what would happen is nothing. You'd sit there and there were students who were like, it's been 60 minutes, it's been 90 minutes, it's been 2 hours, it's been 2.5 hours. And LSAC was aware of that. We knew that because I was flagging issues to them. They could see it, they could hear it as well. And so they added staffing for the next day and the wait times dropped way down. This time when they went into this, they said beforehand, I was talking to them and they were like, we've added staffing and ProctorU has added staffing because we don't want to have that problem. So I heard a few problems on the second day with some waits that all of a sudden stretched to like 30 minutes, but it was far, far rare. It was only, I think, 1 or 2 people that let me know about that, whereas previously it had been dozens. And so they attacked the problem and they fixed it. Now, of course, what happens at that point is in May, so many people had been complaining about wait times and it was such an irritant that you couldn't hear a lot of the other complaints that were out there.
Right.
Now that noise has been removed. And so you can see that there's still issues. This time the issue was, for me at least, a lot of proctor interruptions and then disconnections from the test. Now, we know they added a pause button, and that did help because I had a couple students who were like, there was an issue, I was disconnected, they were able to return me right back to where I was previously.
That's a Proctor pause button, by the way. You don't get to pause the test yourself.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's okay. I'm
No,
sorry, everybody really perked up there for a minute. Let me deflate you.
No, I mean, sorry for everybody out there. I'm like, you can't pause the test. They pause it for you. But
that's good. I mean, in May, when these issues arose or some connectivity happened or they thought your computer was doing something a little bit sketchy, they would just step in and start chatting with you, talking to you, and your time is still running. Now they can at least pause the test, show you a non-test screen, and sort it out with you and then resume.
That's exactly right. And they can return you to where you need to be. If you get disconnected and you're on question 20, when you go back, they can put you at question 20 again. So it's actually kind of cool that way. Mm-hmm. I think now that the long delay complaints really disappeared and these complaints now appear to be the most significant group, what we will see is they will recognize that and that will be their focus heading towards July. All right, how do we stop this problem? Because when a proctor comes onto your machine for whatever reason, it's really, really difficult to avoid it. They will take over control. They'll move your mouse around. You'll be able to see that. It's incredibly aggravating and distracting. And so when you're dealing with something like that, you don't have a choice. You kind of really have to be like, hey, can you address this? And a lot of the proctors don't really understand that, hey, I'm taking a test, man. I don't want to be distracted. This is high level stuff. I need to focus. So it can get a little bit problematic with that. And I'd like to see that get addressed where they're like, if a proctor takes over, they pause the test entirely.
Right.
Not,
even the ability to adjust.
Around.
Right. Even the ability to adjust time would be useful. I don't want to give proctors too much control of things, but the ability to at least manage time as they know they're interrupting you would be great. Or like, hey, we're still having this conversation. My next section started. And you can see 90 seconds in the next section have gone by. Start the section over or add 90 seconds. That to me would be a great feature too.
Yeah, one of my students was like, the proctor was trying to chat to me about an issue, and I'm like, I'm taking the test.
Right.
It's like, if you want to chat with me, pause it. So it's a training issue, obviously. You're talking about thousands of test takers, hundreds of proctors. I understand the logistical issue that we're facing here, but that's probably going to be the big focus going forward here.
Yeah, on LSAC for sure. Let me just echo one other thing that I've been advising people. And it's funny, I'm sure this was the same in May. It was just a phrase that you've used a few times here, like the signal to noise ratio. There was so much noise about other things in May that you didn't get a full signal spectrum. You didn't see everything on that bandwidth or wavelength. There's been some issues with people who have accommodations through LSAC, where those accommodations don't show up either at all or in full with ProctorU, and it is ProctorU who makes the decision as to how your test is going to be delivered. If you're supposed to have extra time, if you're supposed to get breaks between the sections, whatever the case may be, ProctorU is the ones who have to have that information before you start your test. So what I've been advising people to do is first check with ProctorU to see what accommodations they have you officially scheduled for or officially allowed to have. If there's any discrepancy, immediately contact LSAC and have LSAC contact ProctorU directly. That is the only way ProctorU will change your status, is if they hear directly from LSAC. You cannot do it. So you have to go through this back channel to get essentially back to the front line. But that's the thing to do before your test day. Just confirm this. If there's any difference, LSAC can fix it for you, but they have to fix it for you. So, again, jump on top of that, especially if you're taking an accommodated test later this week and still have the time to double check it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about this test.
Okay.
Let's give a rundown of kind of what happened, and we'll talk a little bit about the challenges that this kind of exam presents for students. And let's compare this to like a regular exam that you get.
Okay.
On a regular exam, where everybody gets together on the tablet, essentially what you have is everyone's got the same 4 scored sections. So there's a real commonality, a shared experience between examinees. And then the thing that's rotating around is this experimental section. And we know that they've got experimental sections out there where there's multiple reading comps, multiple logic games, multiple LRs. But still, because 80% of what each person saw was the same, you can very quickly figure out what's happening. It's one of the things that allows us to make predictions about test scaling and have them be pretty accurate, is because we have a lot of information from a lot of different sources about what's going on here. Now, we know they've been worried about cheating on the Flex. We know it's a shorter test. We know there's no experimental.
Right.
So I think they were very worried about the fact of if we just put one test out there with 3 sections that were the same for everybody, it would quickly get out what was going on, and then some people, especially later test takers, would be advantaged. So we saw this in May. Mm-hmm. They went in with a plan. In June, they executed that plan again, and I think maybe, it's hard to tell, they might have even executed it at a higher degree of complexity, because it was really difficult this time to figure things out in terms of who had what. Here's what we kind of know what happened. They used 2 main LSAT forms from the past as the base to draw from. So that's two LSATs of 4 sections each. But as they did this, they only used 3 sections, and they mixed and matched everything. So students out there could have had either of 2 logic game sections, mm-hmm. either of 2 reading comp sections, and any of 4 logical reasoning sections. At least that we're aware of, and we're aware that there was at least all of that was used.
Yeah, that's at the minimum. It could have been that something else got snuck in a rare case.
That's 16 different test forms if you run the math on that.
And don't count section order.
Yeah, please. Don't add
That's
that.
where I can do this. That's 96
disaster.
different versions of what that would be.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Let's just keep sectional order out of it before we lose our mind. But think about that for a second. That's 16 different versions. And it's interesting. They don't just throw all 16 right on the fire to begin the day. What they do, I think, is very interesting. They start off with one form, then they add a variation, like they put a different form on it, then they add a different change to it. And then you come back the next day and they continue to do that so that it slowly spools out that early test takers end up with what is ultimately a very different type of test than what later test takers get. And I had to caution people throughout the weekend. I'm like, look, there are multiple reading comps here. There's multiple logic games. Just because you heard somebody had a reading comp that was difficult, you don't know that you're getting the same section. Don't go in with like a preconceived notions about what's about to happen because you're probably not getting the same test.
That's right.
You might, but it's a low percentage chance that that's going to occur.
Yeah,
And
it really has been interesting watching these things evolve over the past 2 days. It's a lot like watching a tree grow or something, where it starts off as just this single trunk and everybody has the same test on Sunday morning, and then it branches and they've added something new, and then those branches branch. And by the end of the day on Monday, you're out there counting twigs. It's branched that many times. And that's where things get really complicated.
yeah, because at first you think, well, this is, these were my sections. And we've had some challenges on like Twitter and Reddit and so forth where people are like, oh, so this logic game section was this scale prediction. I'm like, it's not that simple. It is more complicated than that.
As we will explore shortly.
Yeah. So multiple forms for the flex are the norm. When you take this test in July, you should expect this to be the case. They've done it twice now. I thought they did it very smoothly throughout the 2 days here in June. And, you had test takers out there who had the same logic games, the same reading comprehension, and they didn't realize they had different logical reasoning sections. We could see it because we could see some of the things that they were talking about and different times of day and so forth. But that's a real challenge if you're sitting there right now thinking, well, okay, what does that mean for the scaling?
Yeah, it's a real challenge if you're sitting right here wondering what that means for the scaling, frankly. Let me ask you a question that I've gotten a few times from people, because I think at a glance, anyway, this is an alarming scenario. Wait, you're telling me that I'm going to apply to schools with a score and be compared to this person over here who took the same test day as me, but might have had 3 different sections, or might have only had 1 different section, and yet they're comparing us. Is this fair?
Yes.
Moving on.
Yeah. I wish to talk about it no longer.
I wish to talk about it no longer as well. It just keeps coming up. Fairness seems to be the operative undercurrent of all of this. People ask, is it fair to do 3 sections versus 5? Take it at home versus in a room? Even digital versus paper face these objections.
Yeah. It's fair because they don't all get the same scaling. They're going to be adjusted. If you got a version that had slightly harder logic games, slightly harder reading comprehension, slightly harder LR, you're going to get a looser test scale than the person who got the slightly easier versions of all those sections. That's the only way to make this fair. I'm fully aware that they know that. This is, be like test making 101. You just can't slap the same scale when people have different sections. And that's what all that testing that they did over the years has added up to. So when we look at something like this, you have to, you got to mix and match, and you're going to have to make an assessment. We're going to talk about the various logic games and logical reasoning sections, and then a little bit of the LR as well. That'll give you kind of like a matrix look at what is possible in here. But just realize that you're dealing with a lot of variations. Each one of them is going to have its own set of adjustments. And consequently, I think that's where the fairness comes in. They're professionals. I've said before that the psychometrics department there is, I think, one of the best in the world. Yeah. They're very solid. The test is exceptionally well made. It's at a really high level. If anyone can do it, I trust them to be able to do this. And I'm not seeing anything that tells me so far that they're having any difficulty. I think this is right up their alley.
Yeah, I agree with you on all that. So you want to talk about some of that specific content?
Yeah.
With the disclaimer that we always put on first?
We're only going to talk about generalities.
Yes.
We may know a lot more about these two tests that they used as the base. We're not going to talk about answer choices. We're not going to talk about like logic games rules. We're not going to go in depth in anything that would be prejudicial for somebody who may yet need to take this exam.
Yeah. If you've come here looking for strategies, sorry to disappoint.
I'm not going to talk about that, but I will say this. You will be able to figure out which test that you had and which parts of it that you had. We have enough we'll share some of the basic topics. I don't think that'll change anybody's experience, but at least it'll give them a sense of like, well, was my perception correct or not? And let's talk about the two exams they use, because essentially what they did is they took the February 2011 LSAT, and then they also took the February 2012 LSAT, an exam that's been used quite a bit, especially in the last 3 years for like international makeup exams. They use those two as the base.
Yeah, this was actually, I made this comment to somebody, and so I'll keep my promise that I would tell you all the instances of the February 2012 test, which was the one primarily used on day 2 of this Monday.
A little bit. They use the RC on Sunday, but mostly
it was
they
the
use this test on
primary.
Monday.
The bulk of tests on Monday saw more content from Feb 2012 than from the other one. 2012 was obviously the first use. They used it again in September 2017 in Europe. They used it September 2017 down in Florida in the wake of what I believe was a hurricane and some test center closures. They used it January 2019 in Asia, March 2019 again in Europe, so about a year and a half later from the first Europe use. And then, well, they're using it now for the Flex. That's at least 6 instances of this test appearing in some form or fashion.
Which also tells you that they've got a massive amount of data on this exam.
Yeah. They've
repeatedly administered it to groups around the world. They have a pretty good insight into how it works. And so, it's interesting because it looks to us like on Sunday morning when people started taking the test that what they basically had was the February 2011 exam.
That's right.
So they had the logic games from that. They had the reading comprehension from that. And then they started off with the 26 question LR from that test. Then as time went on, all of a sudden we noticed that the LR count had changed from 26 to 25. So they flipped in the other logical reasoning section from that test. And then later on in the day, they flipped in the reading comprehension from February 2012. So early on, what we heard about the reading comprehension was about civil rights and a shipwreck. And then later on in the day on Sunday, you started hearing about heirloom crops and the sandstorm.
Dinosaur fossils, yeah.
Yeah, that passage. So, and then they then had 2 LRs that they were flipping around in there, both of them from the February 2011 test. Now, maybe later on in the day, they started flipping in more from the Feb 2012 exam. At that point, I think I'd been working since 3:30 in the morning. I was like dying. I'm not sure I was really able to track anything on Sunday night. I feel tired right now, but Sunday night was a long one.
I thought I was a martyr for my 8 a.m. alarm. Look at you.
No, first tweet of the day was at 3:30, and then our friend Mike Spivey immediately sent me a tweet back where he was like 3:30 for you, 4:30 for me, and it's just a picture of darkness against his laptop. And I usually don't work that early. I know he does all the time.
I was going to say, Mike's a maniac. That's normal for him.
Yeah, he is crazy. But so you have this kind of situation where you end up with really a matrix of 4 base forms that we talk about, and it's built around the idea of what the logic games and reading comprehension were on both tests. All right, so you've got one, which is the February 2011 test. The other is the February 2012 test. So when you were trying to figure out what it is that you had, that's the first place to actually start. Then you worry about the logical reasoning after that. So let's talk about that in context here. There were 2 reading comprehension sections. Okay, the first one is what we've referred to as the civil rights / shipwreck UNESCO passage set. Mm-hmm. That was the harder of the 2 reading comprehensions from all reports. The easier, and I'm going to address the harder, easier comparison in just a second,
Definitely.
Was the one that comes from February 2012, which is about heirloom crops and the sandstorm and the dinosaurs and so forth. Keep this in mind. When I say harder and easier, we're talking about really fine line differences. This is relative to each other. They're both hard. It's not like there's some easy LSAT RC section out there. So when we say harder and easier, don't think to yourself, well, they said it was easy. Oh my God. What we're saying is it was tough because all RC sections on the LSAT are pretty tough. We're just saying that one of them was harder than the other. And so it's easiest for us to just kind of turn them in that way. But don't mistake what we're saying. We're not saying, boy, this was a 9 out of 10 difficulty and the other was 2 out of 10 difficulty. That's not what we're saying at all. They're all like 7, 8, 9, and 10 difficulty passages.
Right. No, this is all relative, not absolute. Comparative versus superlative degrees, I suppose. It's like when I say this is a really cool idea, but I'm really using it in the context of the LSAT. Cool on the LSAT and cool in life are not necessarily the same thing.
That's
occasional overlap, but rarely.
I love that.
Yeah.
All right. So 2 RC sections, civil rights, a little bit harder, heirloom crops, a little bit easier. Then you've got a pair of logic games as well. The one that they started off by using on Sunday was the one that has plows and paintings and trains. That particular section is a little bit easier compared to the other section, which came off February 2012, which is the one about the pets in the apartments,
right,
as well as like the long, short commercials. So here's the thing, like a lot of people on Sunday were like, that game section, there was one game in there that, you know, people didn't like that much, but overall, most people were like, it was reasonable. They weren't hating that section. And a lot of people who had the early Sunday test came out and they were like, look, it wasn't logic games. It was the difficulty here. It was reading comprehension. You know, I felt some LR difficulty in there, but reading comprehension really bothered me. Games wasn't where I got smashed. By the time you got to later on in the second day, I was hearing a lot more about logic games is brutally tough. I'm struggling with that, and some of the LR was really hard, and you know, elements of the reading comp as well. So this is going to have an effect. If you had, say, what would be called the easier combination there, let's say you had the trains and plows games along with the heirloom crops and the sandstorm reading comprehension, you're probably looking at, I'm going to say this and we'll explain it, a base scaling of -7. All right, and that's going to change based on the LR. Right. So this is where it gets complicated. But this is the so-called easy combo.
Right. Right.
The
Which
hard
-7
combo
for the flex is a tight scale.
Yeah, that's the problem. The harder combo, relatively speaking, is that apartment pets games section along with the civil rights shipwreck / shipwreck reading comprehension section. Right. On that, you're probably looking at more like a -9 scale for a 170. I could see there's going to be versions of this I think are going to be ultimately -10 depending upon LR, but that's your base. So if you had that, you're starting off with like a looser scale compared to the other individuals. And if you had a mixture of those two, you're probably looking at right in the middle. You're probably looking at a -8 as a base. Mm-hmm. So everybody out there who took this test is in one of these 4 categories. Either -7, -8, -8, or -9, depending upon whether you had the harder or easier versions of each one. And that's why we say there's a little matrix. You know, that I remember writing it down at some point earlier today when I was like, I need to get this straight in my head because it's starting to like swirl around. In a sense, you could make a really great logic game out of like the assignment of all these sections. Maybe I'll do that just as kind of like an evil exercise. Create a game built around like, how do you assign things? And the students who take it all at the same time can't have this and so forth. So if we have that as the matrix, what do we do when we get to logical reasoning then, John?
Well, this is where things go from bad to worse in terms of just the complexity of all of this. Because now, if you have these as your base number, somewhere between the 7 and 9 starting points on this 4-point reading comp logic games intersection, when you start to add in the reading comprehension, of which, again, there are 4 additional options for them to pick from, this is going to shift your scale potentially up or down.
You're talking about LR, by the way.
I'm talking about logical reasoning now, yeah. So starting at these RCLG launch pads, as you add in LR, you have the ability to actually shift the scale probably a point or up or down, or not at all. I think if it's a middle-of-the-road LR, your scale stays about where it is. Super hard, it's going to loosen. Super easy, or again, relative, it's going to tighten. So that -8 starting point could go to -9 or -7. As a for example, depending again on which LR. And this to me is a little more about feel. because there's so much in this. It's much harder, I think, to judge universally that, oh, that 25 section LR that had this question and it was hard for everyone.
And let's make a comment about the question counts, because the two logical reasoning sections that we saw used most frequently on Sunday, one was 25 and one was 26.
26 more in the morning, 25 more in the afternoon. Yeah.
Yeah. And the reports were that the 26 question section, and obviously we have a lot of history with this test, was that the 26 question one was slightly harder. When you got to the Monday test and they started pulling more so from the February 2012 exam, both of the sections on that test were 25. So I had students who were like, oh, I had the 25 question LR. And I'm like, there were three
of those. Yeah.
You know, one guy on Twitter was like, well, I had the one with cats. And I'm like, I wish I could say automatically which section that was.
Right.
But I'm like, I have no comment because I just don't know. I need more information than just a single question out of 100 different ones.
A single word out of a single question out of 100 different.
That was tough. I looked at that and I was like, I am not a magician.
Cats, huh?
Right now. It was funny. But I felt, I feel for the person because they're like, well, I'm just trying to figure it out. And I'm like, trust me, they haven't done this intentionally. This is a very smooth way to thwart people's ability to kind of get a good sense of what was really happening. And that's what they want. They would prefer this to be an entire black box. Well, I think they've pretty much close to perfectly achieved that.
Yeah, it is awfully dark in here. That is for sure.
Yeah, in terms of like understanding this. But as John says, when you look at those LRs, the 26 questions seem to be a little bit harder than the 25 on Sunday. The sections that we saw that were mixed in more so on Monday, I had a lot of reports that those were hard sections.
I did too.
These were the sections. One of them had like Victorian houses and bathtubs in it. There was another question on okra and gumbo, real Southern style question. And then the opposite section was about liming a lake. There was a question about a Martian meteorite in there. These were not, as far as we can tell, easy sections. I'm wondering if that liming the lake section was slightly harder, but I'm not totally certain. I had some very reliable reports, and looking back on our notes over history, I can see some pretty reliable reports that the Victorian houses section was not easy either.
Yeah, I think they were both pretty tough. Side note, I had a sip of bourbon when you said okra. It was like a reflex. I couldn't.
You go in the Kentucky Southerner route
right.
there.
Yeah.
It's
okra.
Your Georgia heritage coming out.
That's about time. So, yeah, the two test sections from the February 2012, primarily Monday appearances, seem to be harder on the whole, but how do you compare those to the 26 question on Sunday morning from February 2011? This is where it gets sticky, really. I mean, the whole thing is sticky, but this is where it gets positively like super glue.
Yeah, and there were people who were talking about the section they had, and you can't really tell what it is that they're saying.
Right.
So, a lot of what we're saying about this test is based upon the history of what we know about it from prior administrations. Some of it's based upon like what we heard people say and the conversations that we had with students after this particular test. But you have to kind of look at it and say to yourself, all right, if I know what my combination of RC and LG was, I have a base number. How was LR? Did I get one of the sections that was like pretty brutal? Maybe that's going to open it up another point for me. Or did I feel like it was kind of middle of the road? All right, then it's going to stay at that base number. If you had that 25 LR on Sunday early on, that's probably not going to add a point to your scale. It might keep it the same. It might take away a point. But again, you're going to have to make an assessment as to which LR that you actually had here, because this is becoming less scientific for us. I think, John, you would agree with this, that in the past, when we've made scale predictions, we felt very comfortable because, again, 80% of what people are talking about is the same test.
We knew more or less what all of the scored content was. Maybe not line by line, question by question, but we had a very good sense of everyone experienced the same thing. This is a choose your adventure moment. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a real choose your adventure. So keep that in mind. If you had, and I'll go through it one more time just so everybody's on the same page, the hard combo was the logic game of apartments and pets and the long-short commercials paired with the reading comprehension of the civil rights and the shipwreck. Those were the harder versions of LG and RC that we saw used. That would be -9. as a base scale. The easier combination was the opposite pairing. The logic games was plows and paintings and trains, and the reading comprehension was heirloom crops and the sandstorm and the dinosaur stuff. That was a base combination of -7. If you had one of each, your base combination is -8. So start there, add on the logical reasoning section you had, and that will get you pretty close to what we think is going to be accurate. But there are 16 different pathways here. That's why when people were saying, hey, just tell me what I got, I'm like, not so easy, my friend. I wish it was easier. I want it to be easier. I do not want to have to go through this every time. But I think this is the new reality that we're facing for a while. So off to the races indeed.
Off to the races. Ready for a finish line. You do make kind of an oblique reference to it. I'm going to put you right on the spot. You talk about the reality we're facing for some time. Let's talk a little bit about what all this might mean then for the future.
You and I had a conversation earlier today, actually, where in the midst of this, as we watched them add in the second test and then really just churn the well as strongly as they could, I was sitting there thinking, this has got to be part of the future of this test. They may at some point go back to in-person testing. I think that's what they would like to do. But if they can get this successfully optimized and eliminate some of these proctoring problems, interruptions, and disconnections, I see a future where this is most likely to be the way they're going to deliver the LSAT. It's got to be cost effective when you don't have to buy tablets for everybody. You still have the same proctoring costs. Maybe it costs more through ProctorU. But you don't have to like reserve rooms anymore at various colleges and so forth. It's a different set of problems, but it certainly is. They're showing that realistically they can deliver this. If they could lock down this last 1% of problems, it would be a pretty good experience for most people. So the other thing is that you look at it and it allows them to kind of fix problems faster. You got an issue with a student? Well, hopefully you can reschedule them relatively soon.
A few days later, yeah.
Yeah, in some instances. So when things like that happen, that's a really convenient thing to be able to all right, just take it from home. There's a lot of positives to this experience that, again, if you get everything ironed out, I could see it working.
Yeah.
The big objection has been...
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say the big objection has been the experimental sections.
That's exactly what I was about to say. It's funny, when this started, we saw a number of logistical issues, potential issues, from, the ability to facilitate this in terms of test security. The way they've done this test in May, to a degree, have largely resolved those concerns. Are they going to be able to make sure people are equipped with the right sort of equipment? How do you handle fallout? Most of that has been taken care of. ProctorU's got a little ways to go. They can put in some more safety measures, but really the only looming lingering question mark, at some point they're going to have to reintroduce experimental sections. How would you do that if you're them and you want to maintain this flex format indefinitely?
Well, we know they chose the 3-section format because it was one that didn't allow people to take a break, and they didn't want that. They did not like the idea of somebody getting up and leaving the room and having that time, and I think that was all about cheating concerns. I'll be honest, though, I've never felt like you can get an advantage by taking a 5-minute break. Like, your break during the test is really just mental. It's not as if the typical student, or really hardly anyone, is benefited, even if you had an open book. If somebody could go and look up something in the Logic Games Bible, it's not really going to change much because it's not the nature of the test. This is a process test, not a fact-based test. You don't ever need to go and look up the date of some battle, in France in the 1700s. It's not that kind of issue. Yes, on a history test, open book could be hugely advantageous, but not when this is built around methods and techniques that are all process-oriented. So I think what they should do is just accept the fact that having a break isn't a big deal. Cheating on this test isn't going to be built around somebody looking something up or even saying to their friend, what's going on? Cheating on this test I think, a totally different animal ultimately. It's not something I really want to talk about.
No, me neither. But it's not a phone a friend, millionaire lifeline kind of situation. Nor is
exactly.
Let's say you had like games and reading comp as your first 2 sections. You get a break. You know you're going to have a logical reasoning section coming. What are you going to go scamper into the hallway and start speed reading the logical reasoning Bible? Good luck. You know.
I would not advise that you doing that.
No, it's just not how this works.
Well, the fear might be, let's say you had those 2 sections and you've got a couple of friends taking the test at the same time. You all get out at the same time. Well, that's no guarantee because you don't know if you all got connected at the same time. So right away, the plan's in some degree of tatters. So then let's say that actually did work out. You call them. How do you know that you have the same test form?
Exactly. When each section is test unique or user unique, it's becomes entirely like useless to say like, what were your logical reasoning questions? I haven't had that section yet. There's no guarantee you're even going to get the same section.
They might start talking to you about, well, there was about lime in a lake and there's Martian meteorite stuff and there was this question. And then you get to the section, it's like, well, I didn't have any of that. That's the way they thwart this. So I think what they should do is add a 4th section. That's an experimental. And then give students a break in between sections 2 and 3. Mm-hmm. So like do the first 2 back to back, take a break, have a timer that goes off for 10 minutes where you can get up, move around, use the restroom, and leave the room. It's not, it isn't a huge criminal violation. And if you want, you can come back and restart immediately, or you can let the 10 minutes run out. But if you're not back in 10 minutes, sorry, test starts without you. And that's just the nature of the game. I don't think cheating is a realistic problem based upon this. I'm an expert at this test, and I think that cheating on it would be exceptionally difficult. So, and I don't want any invitations, and I don't want any propositions about it. They will not be taken. They will be rejected soundly. But I'm just pointing out that just from where I sit, I don't think it's a serious issue. They've done a really good job of setting this up, so it's confusing. We just tried to talk about the scoring scales, and I think we did a really good job, and it's still... it's still a lot of options to go through. I feel comfortable with the way we explained it, and I know how difficult it was for someone who's listening to be like, wait, this was that? Then it's hard to explain. So, I don't know. How does that sound to you? You think that 2 + 2 with a break in the middle would work?
That's exactly how I would do it. If they're going to commit to this at-home virtual testing, and you just listed off a whole bunch of advantages for it, it's hard to think that there's not a ton of appeal or... I suppose the outcome, that the appeal doesn't outweigh the risks, the costs, the harm, the concerns. This seems like the LSAT of the future. In other words, I think what we're looking at in these flex is essentially a step towards what will become a permanent scenario here.
So do I. I will add one point to that. We're not saying that that's it. There's no more in-person testing.
Right. No.
I'm saying that they may go back to an in-person form when it is possible from the virus problems that we're having, to be able to do that. But it wouldn't surprise me at all if 2 or 3 years down the road they said, hey, we had a really interesting experience. We've made some tweaks to it, and now we're going to go for it. I could see this being the delivery system of the future, and I could deal with that. I think they've executed it well enough. And so we may talk about like, well, this was a B+ grade, but I've said this before, they pulled off something pretty sizable in terms of like the logistics and the challenges in a very short amount of time. And yes, for the people who had problems, everyone knows that I've got the deepest sympathy. I've tried to help as many of you as I possibly can. But by and large, they've done a really good job with it.
Yeah, we give this a B+ only because we're those professors in college that you hate. They try to fail a third of the class.
We're those jerks.
Yeah, we are. This is a very, very strict scale that we grade on. And the fact that they have this quickly gotten that good a grade, I think is a real testament to them. I'll say, too, they're about to make an effort to take this flex test global towards the end of July when they do it internationally. I think if they pull that off with relatively few hitches, then that's really going to speak to the viability of this as a permanent solution.
Yeah. Then everyone will be on equal footing globally. Yep. They move those June international tests to the regular July Flex administration now.
That's right. In the middle of July. I guess it's 14th and 15th, something like that. 12th and 13th, sorry.
It's right in there.
Yeah.
So we know that's coming up. And obviously, if you've now finished this Flex, If you're taking that next July Flex, hopefully the situation gets even better. Hopefully you had no problems, and next time you don't have any problems either. And if you did have problems, I know how devastating it is, and I'm right there with you. It sucks 100%. Let's hope that in July, if you do retake it then, that they get it right. They now have time. They've proven that they can actually address these issues because they certainly took care of the wait times problem by and large. Let's hope they can take care of some of the disconnection proctoring issues. And, we can move forward, just get better and better.
Yeah, I've got a lot of confidence that July is going to be another step in the right direction. This is definitely an encouraging progression from May to June. So,
agreed.
Yeah, on the whole, I'm pretty pleased with what I've seen. What if you are taking that July test, regardless of what just happened to you or to others in June? What do you do from kind of here to there? And maybe we can wrap things up on this closing
I think that's
point.
how we will.
Perfect.
We got a month. You got 1 month to prepare, basically.
It's about 4 weeks to the day, in fact.
Well, the first thing I would point out is at least now you should be able to walk in realizing that, hey, the sections are going to move around. Even my scaling is going to move around. So let's not worry about that beforehand. The other thing is that I had several people say like, well, LR's clearly changed. Like some people were really scarred by the situation with the logical reasoning, particularly yesterday. I had 1 or 2 people tell me, this is completely new. I've never seen anything like this. Well, I think right now you realize that's not true. This has been around, both these tests from 2011 and 2012. This is the same thing that it always is. What you're seeing when that happens to you, the LSAT's tough. During the actual testing environment, it's going to feel different. Someone was saying, well, they've put in like completely different games. And I was like, I know the games on these tests, both of them well. They have not. There's nothing on here that is like mind-blowingly different or new. Variations on old themes, yes, but that looks new during the test. So the thing is, balance your studying. Do the things that you always would do. Focus on those areas where you're not very strong. If you've not taken a Flex exam, we have them. They're still available. They will go kind of like out of the public eye in the next couple of weeks, but if you buy them now, you can still use them in the future. Practice with it. I had a number of students tell me, and I think you had the same experience, where they were like, thank God that I practiced with just the Flex format beforehand, because otherwise I would have been like fumbling around. And you can practice with things like Control F. I had said beforehand, I'm like, you'll be able to do it. And I don't think I would do it, but if you want to, go ahead. And I had a lot of people come back who were really worried about it, and then they use it and they're like, it wasn't that helpful. I'm like, that's the problem. You mostly don't need it. But that's the kind of thing you can practice beforehand and determine for yourself and eliminate uncertainty.
Yeah, ditto a lot of these tools, the highlighting, the underlining, the scratch paper, all that's going to come down to you, but you're going to figure it out by being a bit of a mad scientist. This prep time is your laboratory experiment.
You got a month for July. Focus on your weaknesses. If you need, we've got accelerated courses that you can take for the Flex tests that are set up. You can get a tutor and work on the things that are troubling you the most. There is plenty of time to change your scores significantly at this point, but you have to put in the time and the effort and take up that mantle so that you can do as well as possible.
For sure. I'll reiterate 2 things you just said, and mostly to drive the point home. I kept hearing the same thing, by the way, about this test, especially the logical reasoning for some reason. It was blended questions. It was a mix of things I've never seen. This is not new. These tests are 8, 9 years old. These tests are in middle school. Like, there's nothing new that's appeared here. It's just a matter of you being comfortable with the diversity that comes through the LSAT experience itself. So it also, to me, really highlights the benefit of going back more than just 2 or 3 years. Go look at some games from the early 2010s. Is that how we call that decade? What's that decade? It's not the aughts. It's 2010s. Fair enough.
I try not to say it.
Go look at some older content. It clearly is what reappeared here. And the second thing is to reiterate the licensing discussion that we had in the last podcast. If you want to buy individual Flex tests, full digital tests, whether from us, which I recommend, or elsewhere, the shelf life on those is quickly running to an end. When we
Your
change
ability to purchase
exactly,
is
the tests
out.
themselves are forever. And your ability to access those tests is fairly lengthy as well, but you won't be able to buy them individually once this licensing flips. And
we're
that's
sitting down with
soon.
LSAC this week. It's setting up a timeline. So I'll know
if
pretty
you need
soon
some
what
Flex
date.
tests for July, for what is very likely August, I cannot recommend enough that you go ahead and pull the trigger on that, because it is going to be too late very soon.
And if you're wondering what the heck we're talking about, listen to our last episode about the licensing change and how it is going to affect every person preparing for this test. The use of digital questions online and kind of like one-off kind of seminars and stuff, that's all being affected by the licensing switchover. So we talk about that far more extensively than I want to talk about it right now. So check that out if you're unfamiliar, because it will impact you as you go forward. Any last thoughts there, John?
No, aside from just a general congratulations, which I know has been more or less an echo the past couple of days for us. We're proud of you guys for getting through it. We know this is never easy. We know it doesn't always go to plan. But, if you stayed strong and stuck it out, or if you've still got a test later this week, we're rooting for you. We're wishing you guys the best. You will get your scores semi-soon. June 30th, 9 a.m. Eastern. You'll have a number waiting for you. So until then, try to maintain a sense of sanity and a sense of social distance.
Outstanding. I second that 100%. I have nothing to add to it. That was very well done.
Thanks, man.
Let's close it out. If you get a chance, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or anywhere else you may find it in the world. And if you enjoy it, and we hope you do, please leave us a comment, give us a rating. And if you have questions, we're always happy to try to answer them for you. And certainly we'll have future podcasts where we do talk about these things. You can send those questions to lsatpodcast@powerscore.com. On behalf of John and myself, have a great week and stay safe. We'll talk to you soon.